When I told people I was moving to Chicago after college, the general response was, "Oh my God, Chicago, what a great city. Let me tell you about the time when I was in Chicago." When I told people I was moving to the Twin Cities, their response was more, "Oh, are you moving for work?" "No, graduate school." "Oh, well, if you can stand the winters, you'll love it." When I tell people I'm moving to Cleveland, the response is more, "Why?" Okay, now, Cleveland has top-ranked museums, one of the top 5 orchestras in the country. It has an amazing foodie culture and a film industry. It also has parks, a lakefront, and a river that is no longer on fire. Cleveland is my hometown, and I love it. When the Cavaliers won the first major sports championship that Cleveland had seen in 52 years, I sat at my desk and I wept. I don't even like basketball. But in a case of if you love something, let it go, I did move to Chicago when I was 21. A few years passed, and after a bumpy start to adulthood and a failed attempt at a master's degree, I started to think about maybe moving back home to Cleveland. I applied for a job at the Cleveland Public Theater, and I did go and have an interview in Cleveland. The 2 men who were interviewing me kept asking, "But why would you want to leave Chicago?" My entire family's in Cleveland. I grew up in Cleveland. I want to move home. I don't think they actually believed me, and I did not get that job. At the same time, my part-time job back in Chicago was all, "Please don't leave," and promoted me to full-time. Cleveland didn't want me. Chicago did. So I stayed. A few more years passed. Then my grandmother was diagnosed with lung cancer. I was ready to move back home and take care of my grandparents right then. Then I got promoted for the second time and had one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life that made me stay in Chicago. I still traveled back home so often during my grandmother's illness that I had the Indiana Turnpike memorized, but moving back home never became the right choice. 2 years after her initial diagnosis, on the day after Thanksgiving, my grandmother passed away. After that, I really didn't think about moving back to Cleveland. A huge chunk of what had made Cleveland home was now gone. A few more years passed. I had now lived in Chicago for 13 years, and I'd made a nice little life there. But I still had this longing, not to move back to Cleveland, but to go back to school. I wanted to go to seminary, and the only school I could even imagine getting my degree was in St. Paul, Minnesota. You know, the opposite direction of Cleveland. And at first, I tried to be a distance learning student because I didn't really want to leave Chicago. I won't bore you with the details, but when that didn't work out, St. Paul did what Cleveland had never managed. It got me to leave Chicago. At least for the 2 years or so it would take to finish my degree. During this transition from Chicago to St. Paul, Joel happened. Joel, bear with me now, is my best friend's husband's older brother. Or my former roommate's older brother. Depends which sibling you ask. Anyway, Joel and I had known each other for about 11 years, and had had in that time maybe half a dozen conversations. You see, Joel lived in Houston and I lived in Chicago, and the family was in Cleveland, and we never really overlapped. Until one family event, we did overlap. And while everybody else was dealing with overexcited and oversugared birthday children, we had another conversation. The conversation itself was fairly mundane, but it started something. It started daily back and forth emails, then weekly phone calls, then cross-country visits. Then, a month before I moved to St. Paul, we decided to become a couple. A 1,000 plus mile long distance couple. Eventually, we started talking about moving in together. But where? I didn't know anybody in Houston. He didn't know anybody in St. Paul. Hell, at that point, I didn't know anybody in St. Paul. But what about Cleveland? He had family in Cleveland? I had family in Cleveland. That might work. So, we decided that we would do the long distance thing as long as I was in graduate school, and then we would move to Cleveland together. As in my previous attempts to move to Cleveland, there was a hiccup. Due to a faculty change and some miscommunication, nobody had mentioned to me that I had a 2-year supervision requirement on top of my coursework for my master's degree. My 2-year program had just become a 4-year program. Okay, now what? Could we do the long distance thing for another 2 years? Should Joel move to St. Paul? Or maybe there was a way to do my master's degree from Ohio? As I was weighing all of these options, I got a text message from my mom. Call me. ASAP. That text message is never good news. I was at work when I got the message, and it took me a little while to get some time and find a quiet place to call her back. As the phone rang, my heart was pounding. I thought, what if it's my grandfather? Or maybe my stepfather? It never occurred to me it'd be my stepbrother in his mid-40s. Zachary died, she said. There was more to the conversation, but that was the only sentence that mattered. Denial can be a great gift sometimes. I managed to make it through the next 4 hours of work. My stepfather is an actor, and he went on stage that night. The play had just opened. Over the next month, we dealt with autopsies and cremations and memorial service planning. At the same time, the play had become a huge hit, playing to rave reviews, and according to some, my stepfather was the hit of the whole thing. And I was 800 miles away from all of it. The good and the bad. I was done. I was done missing things. Suddenly, everything that kept me in St. Paul and had kept me in Chicago didn't matter anymore. I needed to go home. 2 weeks from today, I will be moving to Cleveland. The lease is signed. The truck is rented. The packing is a work in progress. So why am I moving to Cleveland? Because everything is there.